I live in a big city, in an apartment that's barely big enough for me and all the stuff I've accumulated over the years. Early last year, I decided I needed more space, not just in my apartment, but in my life. So, I rented a storage unit at one of those places that's open 24/7. It seemed like a practical, cheap, and most importantly, safe solution. I picked a small unit, but enough to store boxes of old documents, winter clothes I never wore, and a few childhood keepsakes. Back then, I was working as a freelance graphic designer from home, so the idea of having less clutter around seemed perfect. I'd visit the storage unit every now and then, always during the day, and never had any issues. But one specific night, I needed to grab an old photo album of my mom's that was stored there. I had the last-minute idea to give it as a gift, and I thought it wouldn't hurt to swing by before heading to bed. I got to the storage place just after 11 p.m. The place felt even more desolate at night, with that long hallway lit by flickering fluorescent lights. You know that kind of silence that's so deep, it almost hums in your ears? That was exactly what it was like. When I opened the door to my unit, I froze. Instead of my awkwardly stacked boxes, I found shelves set up, filled with stuff I'd never seen before. There was an old typewriter, spotless, books with worn covers in languages I didn't understand, and a row of porcelain dolls, all with fixed stares that seemed to follow every movement. I shut the door instantly, like I thought closing it would erase what I'd seen. My first thought was that the storage place must have switched the locks. Maybe they'd given my unit to someone else by mistake. But when I looked at the number on the door, my stomach dropped. It was definitely my unit. I stood there in the hallway, trying to process what I'd just seen. Logic told me it must have been some kind of administrative mistake. Maybe someone had accessed my unit by accident, or used a master key to store their stuff. But the more I thought about it, the less it made sense. The storage place always seemed organized, and the security was tight. At least, that's what the contract said. I worked up the courage to open the door again and take a closer look. Inside, everything was meticulously arranged, like whoever had done it spent hours organizing. On top of one of the shelves, there was a small wooden box with a note pinned to it. My hand shook as I picked up the note. It was written in fine, slanted handwriting. I like your choice of place. Now, this is mine too. I went back to my apartment that night with a heavy feeling in my chest. I locked the door with 3 turns of the key and sat in the living room, trying to make sense of what had happened. I didn't take anything from the storage unit, not even the note. Part of me wanted to believe it was just some twisted prank, but another part, the part that kept me awake all night, knew it wasn't. The next morning, I called the storage place. They were polite, but not helpful. They told me I was the only one with access to my unit, and their system didn't show any recent entries other than mine. They insisted I come by to check in person. But just thinking about going back to that cold, creepy hallway sent chills down my spine. I wanted to forget what I saw, but something told me that story was far from over. I tried to go on with my routine as if nothing had happened, but the feeling of being watched started to haunt me. Over the next few days, I noticed small things in my apartment that seemed out of place. A book I was sure I'd left on the shelf appeared on the living room table. My coat, which I always hung behind the door, was thrown on the couch one morning. I thought I might just be distracted, but it kept happening more and more often. One night, when I got back from the store, I found a new note under my apartment door. It was folded into 4 parts, and the message was straightforward. Thanks for sharing your space with me. Hope you like the changes. The handwriting was the same as the one on the note at the storage unit. My heart raced. How did this person know where I lived? After that, I couldn't ignore what was happening anymore. Every noise in the hallway, every creak of the floorboards made me freeze. I started avoiding going out at night and changed the locks, but it didn't seem to make a difference. One night, I woke up with the feeling that someone was in my room. The streetlight outside partially lit the room, and I swear I saw a shadow move near the window. I jumped out of bed and turned on the light, but there was no one there. The window locks were intact, and I tried to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks. Even so, I spent the rest of the night sitting in the living room with all the lights on. It felt like that presence, whoever or whatever it was toying with me, testing my limits. Things reached an unbearable point. I didn't feel safe even in my own apartment anymore. Every day became harder to endure. So, one sleepless night, I decided to go back to the storage unit. I needed answers. I grabbed my flashlight and went there just after midnight, when the building would be completely empty. The hallway felt even colder and more oppressive than the last time. I opened my unit's door slowly, expecting to find the same strange scene, but what I saw froze me to the bone. The shelves were still there, but now there was a chair in the center of the space, facing the door. On it, a porcelain doll unlike the others, with an unnervingly wide smile painted on its face. In the doll's lap was a sealed envelope with my name on it. I opened the envelope with trembling hands. The message said, "We enjoy seeing you here. Maybe it's your turn to visit us." There was no signature, no clues as to who might have left it. I left the storage unit without looking back, but the fear didn't stay there. On my way home, I had the feeling that someone was following me. The sound of footsteps echoed on the sidewalk, stopping every time I turned around. When I finally got to the apartment, I locked the door and stood there in the dark for a few minutes, trying to hear anything. The silence was almost as oppressive as the noise before. And then, to my horror, I realized something was wrong. On the living room table, where I never left anything, there was a new porcelain doll, identical to the one in the storage unit. That doll on my table was the breaking point. It was impossible to ignore. Someone had been in my apartment while I was gone. I grabbed it with a cloth, avoiding touching it directly, and put it in the trash bag. My instinct was to call the police. But what would I say? That a doll appeared out of nowhere and I felt like I was being stalked. Without concrete evidence, it would just sound like madness. I spent the next day in a constant state of alert, analyzing every sound, every shadow. As the sun started to set, I decided I needed a plan. I searched the apartment for anything that could help me. That's when I noticed something strange in the hallway closet. One of the backboards was loose. I pulled carefully, and behind it, I found a small hidden space. Inside that space, there were things that didn't belong to me. Old photos of people I didn't recognize, a rusty key, and at the back, a black notebook. I opened the notebook with trembling fingers. It was filled with notes written in tiny, rushed handwriting, as if the person had written quickly or in a state of panic. There were detailed descriptions of every room in my apartment, accompanied by dates and times. My stomach churned when I saw that some of the notes were recent, describing exactly what I'd been doing over the past few days. "Today he changed the locks. Useless," one entry read. Another, dated just the night before, said, "He went back to the storage unit. I like how he tries to resist." My head started spinning. Whoever this was, not only had they been in my home, but they had been watching me the whole time. In that moment, I realized I couldn't stay there anymore. I grabbed the notebook and ran out of the apartment, taking nothing but the clothes on my back and my phone. I stayed at a cheap hotel that night, trying to convince myself that I was safe for now. I spent hours rereading the notebook, trying to find clues. Among the notes about me, there were disconnected fragments that seemed like delusional ramblings. They're everywhere. The space is ours. It always has been. And the visitor must stay. The more I read, the more I became convinced that this was something bigger than just a regular stalker. Around 3 a.m., I received a message on my phone. It was from an unknown number, with only one sentence. "Come back home. We'll wait." The next day, I made a decision that seemed inevitable. I went straight to the police station and handed over the notebook. I explained the situation, leaving out some details that might sound too crazy, but the officers seemed skeptical. One of them mentioned that, without proof of a break-in or a direct threat, there wasn't much they could do. Still, they agreed to send a squad car to investigate my apartment. I waited in the lobby, biting my nails and trying to stay calm. When the officers came back, their expressions were enough to make me freeze. "The apartment is empty," they said. "No furniture, no clothes, no signs anyone ever lived there. Are you sure this is the address?" I left the station unable to process what was happening. How could my apartment be empty? I went there hoping the officers had made some kind of mistake. But when I opened the door, reality hit me. The place was completely vacant. Not even the marks from furniture on the floor or the faded paint on the walls were there. It was as if years of living in that space had been erased. I rushed to the storage unit, hoping to find at least a clue. When I arrived, the hallway felt even longer and quieter than before. My unit was open, but empty. The shelves, the dolls, even my own things were gone. The only thing in the middle of the floor was the same porcelain doll with the wide smile, holding one last note. It read, "You're part of this now." It's been a year since everything happened. After that night, I couldn't stay in the city anymore. I moved to another state, changed my number, and now I live in constant paranoia. Sometimes I think I see shadows moving out of the corner of my eye or find things out of place, even here. I've never received another note or message, but the feeling of being watched has never gone away. The police never found anything in my old apartment or the storage unit, and I still don't know who, or what, was stalking me. I don't know what it means to be part of this, but sometimes I wake up at night with the certainty that I will find out. And when that day comes, I fear there will be nothing I can do to escape.
Please subscribe our YouTube channel.
It was one of those days where the road seemed endless. I was taking a solo trip through Alaska, enjoying the silence and the barren landscape, far from everything. It felt like the perfect setting to think about life. No rush, just me and the road. Stopping at that little roadside diner almost felt like a necessity, since it was starting to get dark and the place seemed like the only option nearby. The waiter, a quiet guy, served me a simple meal. No chit-chat, no looking around at the others. It felt like one of those places with no stories, a place with no people. When I finished, I paid and left. The cold night air hit me right away. That's when I looked at my car and noticed something strange. The two tires on the left side were completely flat. What the hell? I thought, walking over to take a better look. That's when I saw the slashes in the tires, sharp and clear, like someone had done it on purpose. Panic started to rise, but I tried to stay calm. Must have been some animal or maybe a sharp rock, I thought. But I soon realized this damage didn't look accidental. I was alone, no cell signal, and the only thing I could do was try to walk to the nearest town, which I knew was a few hours away. The diner was closed, and the place felt deserted. The worst part was the absolute silence. You couldn't hear a thing, not even the wind or any nearby animals. I tried to look for signs of another car passing by, but nothing. I didn't know exactly how many miles the town was, but I knew I was in a pretty remote area. I took a deep breath and started walking down the road. The sun had already set, and the stars were starting to show, but not enough to light up the path properly. Each step felt heavier than the last, but I had no choice. Just a few more miles, I kept telling myself. Then suddenly I felt something off. I wasn't alone. I looked to the side, towards the forest, and saw figures. They were at a distance, near the tree line, but it was hard not to notice that something was wrong. They were people, but they were standing still, like they were watching me. I couldn't make out details. They were too far away for that. But just seeing something there made me feel incredibly uneasy. I stopped, my stomach in knots. My legs weren't moving like I wanted them to, and fear took over in a way I didn't know was possible. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just my imagination. Maybe it was a group of hunters or someone else who was lost. But then, as I started walking again, I realized they were closer. It was like they'd moved without making a sound. I stopped again, staring at the shadows forming at the edge of the woods. There was nothing I could do but keep walking. I was getting paranoid, that much was clear, but something wasn't right. I couldn't tear my eyes away, like some invisible force was pulling me toward those figures. That's when I turned back to the road and felt my pocket was empty. My keys. My heart started racing. I began checking every pocket of my jacket and pants, but nothing. They were nowhere. I wasn't in control anymore. I looked around, desperate, and the first thing I thought was, someone must have stolen them. But who would do that? I was alone. With no other option, I started heading back to the car, hoping maybe they'd be there. Or maybe I was lying to myself and I'd left them somewhere else. But as I got closer to the car, I saw it was exactly like before. Flat tires, but no keys. Nothing. I lost it. I felt a chill down my spine. The car was there, untouched, but with no keys. I was starting to realize that something really strange was going on, but my brain couldn't fully process it. I looked around, hoping to see something, anything. But all that was there was the empty road, with the figures now much closer to the edge of the forest. They didn't move, they just watched. And that was the scariest part. It wasn't something you could ignore. I couldn't make sense of what was happening. Every step I took seemed to pull me further away from reality, like I was trapped in a nightmare. The feeling of being watched grew stronger. Fear took over me in a crushing wave, and I started running, without any direction, without thinking about what I was doing. I just wanted to get away, leave that place, but my legs didn't move like they used to. When I looked back, the figures had disappeared. But then, I noticed something even more terrifying. The sound. A low sound, almost imperceptible, but growing louder, like something was getting closer to me, fast. My body froze, the terror creeping up my spine. The darkness seemed to swallow everything around me, and the only thing I could hear was my heart pounding out of control. My mind was in panic mode. I didn't know anymore if the figures were real, or if my mind was just playing tricks on me. But the feeling of being followed was real. The sound was getting closer and closer, and I had no idea what to do. I rushed to the car, desperate, and started searching through it, turning everything inside out, hoping somehow the keys would show up. Nothing. Nothing but the emptiness of the car and the fear that was consuming me. It was like the world around me had been overtaken by complete silence. But at the same time, that distant sound kept getting louder, closer. That's when, out of nowhere, the light from the stars went out. There was no more light, and the darkness seemed to swallow everything. In that moment, I couldn't tell what was real and what was just my growing fear. I looked back at the forest and saw the outlines of the figures, now much closer, almost on the side of the road. I felt an intense cold, but it wasn't the cold of the night. It was something different, a chilling feeling that seemed to come from inside me. A wave of despair washed over me, and not knowing what else to do, I ran to the other side of the road, trying to find something, anything, that might give me a little safety. I ran like I'd never run before, not looking back. The feeling of being hunted was unbearable, and the sound was getting louder, like something was chasing me at a terrifying speed. When I finally stopped to catch my breath, I realized I was completely lost. The road seemed endless, and I didn't know where to go anymore. Despair took over me completely. My thoughts were scattered, and all I could think was that I needed to get out of there. I just had to get out of there. I looked back at the forest again, but the figures had disappeared. However, the feeling of presence, that pressure in the air, didn't go away. That's when a light appeared on the horizon. I could hardly believe my eyes. A faint light, but visible, like a car approaching. I ran toward the light, hoping that help was finally on the way. But as I got closer, I realized the light wasn't moving. It was fixed, floating at an odd height. Panic hit me again, full force, and my body froze. I didn't know what to do, but before I could decide, the light vanished suddenly, like it had just turned off all at once. I stood there, in the middle of the road, unsure of what was real and what no longer was. I stood there, in the middle of the road, unable to think straight. The silence wrapped around me again, but now it felt even more oppressive, more dense. The feeling of being watched came back stronger than ever, like something invisible was lurking, waiting for the right moment to capture me. By this point, my body was exhausted, my spirit drained. I wanted to scream, but I knew it wouldn't help. The road was empty, the forest distant and silent. The light I had seen wouldn't return. I was completely alone, and that fear, that uncontrollable terror, overwhelmed me more with every passing second. Then something strange happened. I heard a distant sound, like a scream, but it wasn't a scream of pain. It was something deeper, like a warning. I looked around, but saw no one. The feeling of being in a nightmare grew stronger, like the entire scene was becoming unrecognizable. I wanted to run, but my legs felt weak. Only then, with a terrifying clarity, did I realize that something had changed. The road didn't look the same anymore. The asphalt was different, more worn, like I had been walking on it for days, not hours. The trees around me looked darker, like they had grown faster than was possible. I looked around, trying to find something familiar, anything that would tell me I was still in the same place. But nothing felt right. The shadows of the trees stretched in a strange way, and the feeling of distortion in the environment grew stronger. That's when I realized the figures were no longer in the forest. They had just disappeared, like they had never existed. But the fear remained, like a tangible presence. I was trapped in a place I didn't recognize, in the middle of nowhere, not understanding what was happening. The sense that there was something else there, something beyond my understanding, was almost unbearable. When I looked at the car again, something made me stop. What had once seemed like just a car parked on the road now felt like it had its own presence. The tires were intact, but I didn't know how that was possible. The keys were still gone, and the feeling of being watched was only getting stronger. I walked toward the car, trembling, and grabbed the handle. The door creaked open, and the inside was empty. There was nothing there, except a cold emptiness that seemed to swallow me. I looked back one last time, and for a moment, I had the clear feeling that the figures were there again, at the edge of the forest, watching me in silence. It was like time had stopped. I couldn't understand what was happening, how I'd gotten there, or what those figures wanted from me. The fear had turned into something deeper, a feeling of helplessness that paralyzed me. I looked at the car, then at the road, and for the first time, I realized there was no way out anymore. There was no direction to go, no more choices to make. I was completely trapped. There was nothing, no one, and that emptiness seemed like all that was left. Then, everything went silent again, like the world had frozen in time. And then, suddenly, as if nothing had happened, the moonlight returned with clarity, and the sounds of the night resumed as normal. The figures were gone, the fear had faded, and the road seemed to be just as it was before. There was nothing strange there anymore, but I knew for sure that something had happened. Something I couldn't explain, even if I lived 1,000 years. When I finally found my keys in the pocket of my jacket, the relief was instant, but the feeling that I had been part of something inexplicable stayed with me, like a shadow. And to this day, I can't understand what happened that night.
Please subscribe our YouTube channel.
I've always been the kind of person who believed that solitude was great for creativity. Writing has been my passion since college, but lately, it felt like the words just wouldn't come. So, at the beginning of last winter, I decided to rent a cabin in the woods for a solo retreat. The Airbnb listing seemed perfect. A wooden cabin, surrounded by tall pine trees, almost untouched by civilization. It was a simple place, but cozy, with a porch that overlooked a valley that looked straight out of a postcard. When I got there, I felt almost euphoric with the complete silence and the lack of any modern distractions. No Wi-Fi, no close neighbors, just me, my laptop, and the sound of the wind in the trees. For the first few days, the peace felt amazing. I'd wake up early, brew some strong coffee on the old kitchen stove, and spend my mornings writing. But by the third night, I started feeling watched. It's hard to explain. It was like, even inside the cabin, something was following me with its eyes. I decided to ignore it and focus on my work. But the next day, while walking along the trail that led to the valley, I noticed something strange. On top of a nearby hill, there was a house almost hidden by the trees. It was small and seemed abandoned, with broken windows and an air of desolation. But for a moment, I swear I saw someone standing on the porch, just watching me. I couldn't make out their face, but the figure was tall and still, which made me uneasy. I quickly picked up the pace back to the cabin, trying to convince myself it was just paranoia. That night, the feeling of being watched grew even stronger. After dinner, I sat on the porch to relax and look at the stars. But I couldn't focus on the beauty of the sky. My eyes kept being drawn to that hill. Everything was quiet, but I felt like something was out there. I decided to go inside, close the curtains, and force myself to believe it was just mental exhaustion. Before bed, I checked all the doors and windows, something I don't usually do. But for some reason, it felt necessary that night. Still, I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of something scraping outside. I grabbed a flashlight and scanned the area around the cabin, but saw nothing. I went back to bed, trying to tell myself it was just the wind. The next morning, I found something that chilled me to the bone. In the snow around the cabin, there were footprints that weren't mine. They circled the house, stopping at every window, like someone had been inspecting the place. I stared at those marks for a while, trying to come up with a logical explanation. Maybe a hunter or someone lost in the woods. Still, it was strange that the person hadn't knocked on the door or left any sign other than the footprints. I spent the day feeling uneasy, torn between going back to town or staying and trying to ignore the discomfort. In the end, I decided to stay. After all, I came there to focus, and I wasn't going to let a little paranoia ruin my retreat. That night, I was determined not to let my imagination get the best of me. I tried distracting myself by watching a CI movie on my laptop, but it didn't last long. The battery died, and I sat there in the dark, listening to the wind blow through the cracks in the cabin. That's when I heard it again, the dragging sound, but this time, it seemed to be coming from the porch. My heart raced. I grabbed the flashlight again, but hesitated before opening the door. When I finally mustered up the courage, there was nothing there, just the sound of the wind and the snow that had piled up. But when I looked closer, I noticed something that hadn't been there before. A dry twig, carefully placed in the shape of a circle, right in the middle of the porch. At that point, sleep was impossible. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the couch, holding a kitchen knife in my hand, and keeping my eyes glued to the front door. When the sun finally came up, my head was pounding from trying to find an explanation. I decided to go out and investigate, following the footprints that led up to the hill. I climbed to where I had seen the house the day before, but the place looked even stranger up close. The wood on the walls was rotting, and the windows, which had seemed broken before, were now completely covered with scraps of old cloth. I knocked on the door, just to make sure no one actually lived there. Nothing. But as I turned to leave, I felt a shiver run down my spine. There was something in the highest window. A face, partially covered by the cloth. It wasn't moving, but the eyes seemed to follow every step I took. I ran back to the cabin, my heart racing and my mind in chaos. I tried to rationalize what I had seen. Maybe it was my imagination, a strange shadow reflected by the daylight? But deep down, I knew it wasn't. There was something, or someone, in that house, and it was clearly aware of my presence. When I entered the cabin, I noticed a strange smell, like wet earth and burnt wood. I didn't remember ever smelling that before, and it was strong enough to make me feel nauseous. I decided to open all the windows to air out the place, but when I opened the last one, I noticed that the old armchair in the living room was facing the door. I was absolutely sure I had left it facing the fireplace. That was enough to convince me I wasn't alone. I grabbed my things, determined to leave as fast as possible, but when I reached the door, I noticed something that made me freeze. The key, which I always left hanging by the entrance, was gone. I searched the whole cabin, every drawer, every corner. Nothing. It was like someone had taken it while I was gone. Panic started to rise, but I tried to stay calm. I decided I wasn't going to stick around to find out what else might happen. I grabbed an iron bar I found in the shed behind the cabin and started hitting the latch, trying to force the door open. My desperation was so great that I barely noticed when I finally managed to get it open. I burst through the door with a loud noise that echoed through the forest. I rushed out carrying my backpack and the iron bar, not looking back. The day was almost over, and the sun was slowly disappearing behind the trees, casting everything in a dark orange hue. The walk to where I had parked my car felt longer than before. With every step, I felt like something was wrong. The silence was absolute. No wind, no bird songs, like the whole forest had gone mute. That's when, as I glanced over my shoulder, I saw a figure standing at the entrance of the cabin. It was tall and thin, dressed in dark clothes, with something that looked like a hood covering its head. I couldn't see its face, but I knew it was looking directly at me. I quickened my pace, almost running, until I spotted my car. When I finally got inside and locked the doors, I felt a momentary sense of relief. But when I started the engine, I saw something that made me want to throw up from fear. On the windshield, there was another one of those circles made of dry twigs, stuck on with something that looked like mud. It was like they were leaving me one last warning. I slammed the gas pedal and sped down the dirt road, not caring about the potholes or the sound of branches scraping against the car. I just wanted to get the hell out of there. When I reached the main road, I looked in the rearview mirror and, for a second, I was sure I saw headlights behind me. But they disappeared almost immediately. Since that day, I've never done another solo retreat. I told a few close friends about what happened, but most of them just thought it was my imagination or the stress of trying to write something new. To this day, I still don't know what that figure was or why it seemed so interested in me. All I know is that sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night with that same feeling, the same one I had when I was in the cabin, the feeling that someone is watching me.
Please subscribe our YouTube channel.